few days ago, I was waking up in the morning and trying to think of how I was going to alter my day so I could stay in self-isolation due to the coronavirus. And all of a sudden, the house started to shake. Many of you might have been in the same situation. And for those of us who live along the Wasatch Front of Utah, this is not a very common occurrence. And I immediately started to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then the shaking started to wane. And I thought, well, one of two scenarios here. Either this was a local earthquake that wasn't very large, or it was an earthquake that was a long ways away. And either way, the good news was that it was likely there was not a lot of casualties or damage along the Wasatch Front. And then I started to think about it in a different way. I started to celebrate the fact that we'd had such an event that even from a long distance away or on the Wasatch Front could wake up the people on that morning and also wake them up in another way to realize that we live in earthquake country and that there's enough energy stored on the fault we live on right now to produce a huge earthquake that would not just shake for seconds, but shake for minutes and do lots of damage and put many people at risk. And so it was like a shot across the bow for us to wake up and become much more intense in our efforts to prepare ourselves. So this first slide I want to show you here is the main shock right here near Magna, Utah, and its cloud of aftershocks, which is a common occurrence with earthquakes. It's like you want to break a piece of plywood, a thin piece of plywood, over your knee, and you, just before it breaks, you might have a few little forepops, but then bam, you have a snap, a big snap. That's the main shock. But the piece of plywood doesn't completely snap. There's still fibers that are connected, and so you have to move it back and forth for a while before you can get it to completely break. And that's essentially what the aftershocks are. There was an aftershock that was 4.6, and I felt that one too. The good news is that this diagram here shows the shaking intensity was mostly, as you can see on the scale at the bottom, the colors illustrate that it was weak or light to moderate. Only a few that were strong or very strong, and that was right near the epicenter. However, I'm telling you right now that we have enough energy stored on the Wasatch Fault to change this map into most of those squares being orange and red. Clear out a ways away from where the epicenter would be. And the question that we need to consider is, are we ready for that? We don't know when it's going to happen. We know it already has enough energy to happen at any moment. We don't know when. That's unpredictable. But we still have some time. We don't know how much time to act and get ready. And that's what I want to talk about. So this title slide I've chosen because it reminds me of something that Jane Austen said once. That what are men to rocks and mountains? You can see how tiny the metropolitan area of Salt Lake City seems down there compared to those tall mountains in the distance. And what allowed this valley, the Great Salt Lake Rift Valley, to form inside those mountains is the fact that the earth is being stretched here and the valley's dropping about every 1,000 to 1,200 years, about 10 feet or more. And when that happens, there's an earthquake. So this valley's been forming for millions of years. And that means many, many thousands of earthquakes that have occurred. It's essentially an earthquake valley we live in. So what I want to talk about, first of all, is the fact that we decide whether this earthquake that we're going to have becomes a crisis or a disaster. We decide because preparedness is what makes the difference between those two ways to describe what will happen. This is something we can control. We can control it by making sure that the buildings that we live in or work in or inhabit are going to withstand the amount of shaking that we're expecting. And the things inside those buildings, what we call the non-structural hazards, are secured. It's not a hard thing to do. And we can rise to the challenge to make sure that what is obviously going to be a crisis, because there's so many unreinforced buildings in the valley, some of them will collapse, many will be damaged, and people will find themselves in the wrong place at the wrong time. But that's a lot different than a full-scale earthquake disaster. The difference is in a few hundred lives lost versus a few or tens of thousands of lives lost. And almost complete destruction to a little bit of destruction. So I'd like to talk first about why it seems like natural disasters are increasing, especially seismic disasters. Second, how do earthquakes work so that you can understand what we're facing. Third, what is the forecast for earthquakes along the Wasatch Front? And fourth, how will those earthquakes cause death and destruction here? And then the most important thing we need to talk about is the call to action. What can all of us do right now to prepare? So first, why are the natural disasters increasing? This map here, these two maps, show population density on the left and earthquake hazard risk on the right, designated by the seismic design category, how we should design our buildings at the highest, or we don't need to worry about it. You can see that the density of population along the west coast of the U.S. is high, and also the seismic risk is high. However, in the Wasatch Front, we have a very similar problem. We have this spike of population density right where we have also a high seismic design category. And so if you look at Southern California, it looks like it's the highest risk, but in actuality, it's the lowest vulnerability. So if you look at my formula for disaster at the top of the slide, high earthquake risk, which is the map on the right, plus population density, which is the map on the left. So if there's highs on both sides, right, that increases the formula for disaster. But the most important variable here is the vulnerability. The people in California have been working on this for a long time. And no earthquakes except for the 1906 earthquake has killed more than 100 people. There's been lots of damage, and so there's been an economic hit, but in terms of casualties, because the vulnerability is the major variable, it can create a way for us to survive earthquakes. In the Pacific Northwest of Northern California, Oregon, and Washington, a little bit different situation. They're a little bit behind the curve because the hazards there have only been really discovered in the past few decades. However, the Wasatch Front, which is shown in the middle there, we've known about this for a long time, and we've allowed for our buildings to not be built to withstand what we should expect. I'd also like to show this graph with the definition of vulnerability on the left, where essentially just equals lack of resilience. Why is our resilience low? Mainly because of poor construction, poor site characteristics, meaning that we build in places that are close to mountain fronts where there might be landslides or rock falls or floods or other things, liquefaction. We have a lack of education of what to do before the earthquake and what to do during. And that's because we have a lack of plans, which are based on surviving the event, not just what to do after, and a lack of drills as to what to do during an earthquake to protect ourselves. And we're constantly dealing with corruption, which allows for a lot of our cities to be built in places where they shouldn't be built. And if we look at the right, we see this graph that has fatalities on the y-axis and earthquake magnitude, which is exponential, on the x-axis. And you can see that even small events between 6 and 7, right, create tens of thousands of lives lost in places like India and Iran and Armenia, Turkey. And you can see as the magnitude increases in places where they're not prepared and do nothing, the casualties just keep rising. In Haiti, the Haiti earthquake, which is up there over 200,000 people killed, was about the same size as something that we experienced in California, where only 100 people were killed. And the difference, it was a crisis in both places, but the difference, one was a disaster and the other wasn't. And that's because of resilience. And so you can compare the two. For example, you look at Chile, a magnitude 8.7 earthquake, and very few people died. In Taiwan, a magnitude 7.6, and about the same size as the one in Pakistan. And look, 10 times more people died in Pakistan than in Taiwan. 10 times more people died in Armenia, more than 10 times, than in California. And in Japan, in 2011, one of the largest earthquakes ever recorded occurred, and less than 20,000 people died, versus the same event in Sumatra of Indonesia in 2004. Over 270,000 people were killed. Where does Salt Lake City lie? Well, it's anybody's guess. But if we don't do anything from where we are now, we should expect at least 15 to 20,000 deaths here, depending on the time of day and the time of year and so on, because we have so many buildings that are not built to withstand the shaking that we're expecting, which would be about a magnitude 7 to 7.3. So why are natural disasters increasing? The bottom line is because there's more people in harm's way. And those people that are in harm's way are not ready. So it's vulnerability, which is the difference.